So greetings everyone and welcome to ION Africa. My name is Awa Sarr. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the African Studies Center, and ION Africa is our weekly seminary series. And we're very delighted here today to have Professor Esquith as our guest speaker. And before I hand it over to him, a brief introduction. Professor Esquith teaches in the Department of Philosophy. He has been working with partners in Mali since 2002 on a variety of peace education projects. Since 2018, he has been working in 3 camps for internally displaced persons in collaboration with faculty and students at l'Universite des Lettres et des Sciences Humaines de Bamako okay, this is what's wrong. I can see, sorry. So I was saying that Professor Esquith has been working with faculty and students at l'Universite des Lettres et des Sciences Humaines de Bamako on a photovoice project for young people in 3 camps. He has co-authored 2 articles from former AAP visiting scholar Welore Tamboura on this recent work, and he is currently finishing a book, Radical Poise, Peacebuilding through Political Education, that connects the work in Mali with peace building in other contexts. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Awa. Hi, folks. Hi out there in webinar land. So I have a lot of slides, and some of them I will just zoom through, and some I will linger over. And I'll try and leave time for questions, but there's also an open invitation to interrupt so that there can be conversation or discussion along the way. There's no sort of urgency to get to the very end, though there is a little bit of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but it's just a small pot of gold. So with no further ado, let me start. I took the phrase breaking the cycle of violence from a book that was written in 2003 by Martha Minow, professor of law at Harvard University, which was titled Breaking the Cycles of Hatred, a little more sort of flamboyant title, Memoir, Law, and Repair. And as it says in the first sort of bullet, the efforts to sort of deal with violence in countries that have gone through civil wars or uncivil wars in some cases over extended period of time have not been, I would say, completely successful. War crimes tribunals and truth commissions, the most well-known attempts at intervention, have had their problems. And my hypothesis, and it's not something that I have the research chops to prove. My hypothesis is that one of the reasons for that is that the issues are emotionally charged, that you can, in fact, put together programs addressing material inequality and what's sometimes abbreviated as DDR, demobilization, demilitarization, and reintegration, and there can be sort of policies to do that. Those typically run into problems, and part of the problem is that there are sort of in the actors and in the participants in those programs, whether they're DDR programs or other kinds of security programs or tribunals or truth commissions, the temperature in the room gets very hot, and people aren't able to sort of follow through and deliver. Reparations, of course, is one of the biggest sort of stumbling blocks, but there are many others. And Awa mentioned my work in Mali. In Mali, the ability of the country to sort of bring people who've been charged with violations of human rights has been very limited. They made a self-referral to the International Criminal Court initially after the coup in 2012. That was the only referral they made to the criminal court, and it was not one that involved human trafficking or kidnapping, but the sort of desecration of sacred sites. the attempts there to to bring people to justice in Malian courts have been even less successful. The Commission for Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation in Mali has been equally unsuccessful in terms of generating reparations for communities that have suffered all the way back to the early 90s, but especially in the 20-aughts and the 2010s. So that's a hypothesis that there's an emotional dimension, and sort of speaking from a kind of parochial disciplinary point of view, emotions have not been sort of squarely addressed in both political philosophy and public policy. It seems to me that it's been a kind of narrow view of what the emotions are, despite important work done by feminist philosophers and by others in psychology. The emotions tend to be sort of reduced to a kind of inner state or an inner feeling, as opposed to a sort of network of conduct and actions. And so I guess in the back of my mind, I'm hoping this will be part of a conversation among people who are taking emotions more seriously. I don't want to get emotional about it, but couldn't resist. Can you erase that from the recording? So that's it. And so how does this how's this going to play out in the next? Do we have an hour and a half? Am I right about that? Yes. Oh, I'm so happy. So I haven't exhausted this long, unexpected intro. Didn't eat up half my time. So what I'm hoping to do, and here's a little bit of a spoiler, is say something about how to conceptualize emotions, since I'm coming at it from a more theoretical, philosophical point of view, how to conceptualize emotions, but not, in a kind of sense of the inner feelings that you have about reparations, or the inner feelings that you have about war crimes tribunal effectiveness, or who are the victims and who are the perpetrators, but rather work through the scripts, work through the conduct, work through the events in two places where I think emotions have been taken seriously. And one of them is where we're doing our work in Mali, and the other, and here comes the surprise, because I don't think it was, this is not the big end of talk surprise, but it wasn't in the little write-up that I gave Owl before. I'm going to compare what's going on in Colombia with what's going on in Mali. I've been to Colombia 3 or 4 times in the last few years. When I was teaching in Mali the last time under a European Union program for peacekeepers and peace builders in the region. Some members of the Malian Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission who were in my class, I discovered after I started teaching, I said, so you want to talk a little bit about what you do? And they said, yeah, we're on the commission. I said, are you here to be a student? They said, yeah, kind of. All right, whatever you say. Anyway, during the class, they had to take a few days off because they went to Bogota to meet with the members of the Truth Commission in Colombia, which produced its final report, I think, around 2016, and ever since has been kind of wrestling with political elections, continued violence, a variety of other things, and a photovoice project. So the photovoice project that I had been working on in Mali suddenly had a sort of cousin, the photovoice project in Colombia. And I've been trying to wrestle with the differences between the two, and watching the photovoice project in Colombia really take off and gel in a way that I think is instructive for what we're trying to do in Mali. So the plot here is to say a few things about general problems, set the stage a little more in terms of those two contexts, and then go through those two photovoice projects and see what they tell us about emotions and how they might play into and be addressed through these activities, which I'm calling photovoice. So that was about 10 times more time than I wanted to spend on slide 1. So we're going to move fast. If I can move this, Awa, come to the rescue. Okay, so I think you got the main idea.
You can move back.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I'm good. No, I want to be here. Okay, so the too many arrows. The term that I've sort of concocted for understanding the role of emotions in these civil and uncivil contexts where attempts are being made to break the cycle of violence is a phrase called radical poise. And I'll defend that choice of words later. Okay, so just bear with me. This is called, give me a little benefit of the doubt that it's not cuckoo, and we'll move on. All right. So the two projects, the Columbia Photovoice project and the Malian project that comes out of our sort of longer peace education program called the Cours Collaboratif Éducation à la Paix with the university there in Bamako are the two sort of pieces of the puzzle that I want you to keep in mind, okay? So keep those in mind and keep this sort of the cloud of radical poise hanging over your head as we go. One more thing about radical poise, just to give you an idea of where I want to get to. So I see it as a kind of emotional, political intelligence. So sometimes emotional intelligence in popular psychology terms, means keeping your cool or knowing what's appropriate in certain places, know the norms, know the scripts, that kind of thing. That's fine. That's a good place to start with emotional intelligence. But when it comes to political situations, I call it practical emotional intelligence or political emotional intelligence. I think that's what I called it here. Emotional political intelligence. You pick it, choose your order. There are some competing sort of ways of conducting yourself, competing norms. So they don't all line up in one, in one direction. They pull, there's friction, there's problems dealing with them. And what they have in common is power, right? Unlike the emotions that people are sometimes urged to sort of engage with in situations like Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. We spent a lot of time attending the CBGR hearings in Bamako when they were being held in 2019, 2020. The common advice is think about compassion, think about empathy, think about forgiveness. Those are fine, but they're not the political emotions that I think are necessary to address problems of power and violence and the cycles of violence that seem to be recurring, the tit for tat that happen. And, while I've chosen Colombia and Mali, it's not a problem peculiar to the global South by any means, right? You can see that tit for tat, repayment psychology in our own politics in the US. I don't want to belabor that point right now. We can talk about it later. So what are the constituent elements or the political emotions, some people might call them virtues, that radical poise, allows us to coordinate, synthesize, apply in a course of conduct? It's not radical poise that makes you feel differently inside, but it's a way of, it's a stance, it's a course of action, it's a I use in the book manuscript Awa was did refer to, thank you very much. I use the metaphor of a procession or a march, right? It's a form of being in the world as opposed to an inner state of peace of mind, keeping your cool. And the pieces of the puzzle that we're going to try and find, that's going to be the challenge for you lucky folks who gave up your lunch hour to be here. The thing we're going to look for, things we're going to look for in the photo voice projects in Colombia and in Mali are self-restraint, the ability to limit the escalation of violence, resistance against the abuse of political power, self-respect and dignity in the face of public humiliation. So how do you respond to kind of paternalistic public humiliation in these fraught situations? Humility in the exercise of power, and a kind of struggle to achieve greater reciprocity and solidarity in everyday peace building. So those are not self-explanatory. I just sort of given you a little tagline there for each of them. And we'll come back to them as we kind of look to see what forms of everyday peace building and radical poise might be evidenced or suggested through these photo voice projects. Okay, so that's a lot to hold in your head over lunch. And I, again, appreciate your patience as I work through this kind of compressed PowerPoint. You might think compressed means short. No, compressed means condensed. It's a lot in a lot of slides. All right, so there's some parallels, big parallels between Colombia and Mali. It's not just that I happened to go to these two places and I thought, well, what can I say about these two places? But there's interesting connections. Obviously, extended periods of civil war in Mali, from some of the Tuareg rebellions that began in the 80s, the late 70s. There's been a constant set of sort of low and high moments of violence and conflict. It hasn't broken out into outright civil war in the way that the Colombian Civil War over a 50, 60-year period has. But it's been there's a parallel. Peace accords were signed in other places. The Colombian peace accord was signed in Havana. Doesn't take you long to figure out why. Why did they have to go to Havana to get people to the table? Well, it was because some of the folks at the table would not go to a meeting in Bogota, would not go to a meeting in Caracas, would not go to a meeting in Washington, right? Their politics said, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it in Havana. And in Mali, not quite the same political dynamics, but the peace accord was signed in Algiers. And some people didn't go, right? And some people did. And both peace accords have been, if you will, sort of incomplete, right? In fact, the current junta in Bamako has just said, we're out, right? We're out of that peace accord in 2015. We want a new one, which kind of threw people for a loop, but it didn't surprise them because that junta has been sort of making surprise announcements like that, withdrawing from ECOWAS, withdrawing, having the MINUSMA UN troops pulled out, having the French, not just the French military in Mali pulled out, but all of the social, the entire social presence of the French in Mali has been disassembled. And that meant jobs, that means trade. My guess is that the withdrawal from ECOWAS, if that happens, is going to be the most damaging to the Malian economy, because Mali depends upon regional trade. It depends upon access through the Gulf states. And if you sort of push ECOWAS out, and the ECOWAS folks, everybody know what ECOWAS is, the Economic Community for West African States. It's at one level, it's a trading arrangement, But at another level, there are security protocols that are built into the ECOWAS agreements. So they are, it could turn out to be a very deep self-inflicted wound if that withdrawal happens. So continued violence, large numbers of internally displaced people. In Colombia, it's extraordinary. In 2019, Colombia had more internally displaced people than any other country in the world. Right now, obviously, since 2019, other things have happened in the world, but those people remain internally displaced in Colombia. And those are the people that we're working with IDP. I don't like the abbreviation, but I'm going to use it just for time. IDP camps in Mali, they're large numbers. 600,000 people are in IDP camps in Mali, in a country of maybe 16 million now. I'm not quite sure the exact current population, something in that neighborhood of 16 million. Out of that, officially, 600,000 are in IDP camps. We've been working in 3 of those camps. The Colombia Photovoice project is working in, I would say, even more challenging IDP camps because they're in the rural areas outside of the main cities where the violence was most acute. And that's where they went to work. We couldn't do that in Mali just because the kidnappings had spiked at the time we started doing that, and we didn't want to risk having the people we were working with or ourselves sort of getting in the way of the work. So we've been working in 3 IDP camps in the Bamako area, which is a little more secure. Not great, but a little more secure. There we go. We got through that. Mali today, I've said a lot about that. This is a book that just came out by a woman named Watts, Peace or Democracy, where Mali, Colombia is not on the list, but Mali is among the least democratic, least developed countries in the world, the bottom 11 out of the survey of 31 people. I mean, it had always sort of ranked low when it came to sort of sustainable development goals and that kind of thing, but it's even more sort of seriously struggling. I won't. There was some recent optimism, so let me not paint the picture so bleakly. In 2022, a formerly UN organ, was a publication by the UN. I don't know if it was called the New Humanitarian at that time or right before that or not, but it's now called the New Humanitarian. They do journalistic articles on all parts of the world. They're very involved right now in the Middle East, in the Israel-Hamas war. So if you go to their website, you'll see a lot of that. But in 2022, they were interviewing people in villages, in rural areas in Mali, asking them, well, your commission's not doing too well. Your courts have not sort of picked up the slack. So what's going on? And they started interviewing older members of these villages saying, are you talking to people you consider terrorists? Are you talking to the army, who sometimes acted as a terrorist? Are you talking to any of these folks who are making trouble for you? And they said, no, but we're trying. And they interviewed 4 people who had initiated a local dialogue in a couple of villages. And I think the names of these, or the occupations of these guys are mentioned here, because of being in the camp to communicate with people from the outside, right? Who are we? What are they? So he's now he has a nice position. He was a student of mine in Kati, which is another story. When I first started working in Mali in 2002, 2004. His name is Boubacar Garango. He goes by Garango. And it's a great guy. And I was so sad to see this email. Said, We can be useful and supportive, RTP, because we are now working with many displaced person sites in Mali in the Mopti region, where I live, as well as in Gao and Banjagara. At the moment, however, the government's attitude, that's the military junta, to peace-building projects in Mali is not too favorable. This guy does not, he doesn't exaggerate, right? So not too favorable is an understatement. The NGOs working on these issues, not just his, but another one that we work with, International Sports Alliance, which also has been a great partner for us in terms of trust building in the camps. The NGOs working on these issues are almost at a standstill. So if there's going to be such a project, in other words, the next chapter in the photovoice project, it's better to disguise it as an education project focusing on quality and access to inclusive education, taking into account displaced persons and people living with disabilities. The way I read that was, you can't talk about peace. You can't talk about peace building. You can't talk about truth and reconciliation. We're talking about a more inclusive K-9 education system. And that was from Garango yesterday. So what are we doing? Now, hold on to your hats. I'm going to go fast through the next few slides because I'm going to sort of talk about some concepts that I could go on and whatever and put you to sleep, but I'll just sort of make it quick. Our approach is be local, right? Everyday peace building. That's what we want to do. And everyday peace building means, how safe people feel in their neighborhoods. Can they send their kids to school? Can they go to the market? Can they do the everyday things, right? There's a whole sort of history of the everyday and what it means, but that's the phrase that we use, everyday peace. And Roger McGinty, who's written a book, surprise, called Everyday Peace, identifies 4 ways in which we can identify the power that's generated within these circuits of everyday peace building. These are not the power of the army. These are not power over things, but power that comes from relationships with people and new associations with people. And so he talks about sociality, a kind of low-level form of everyday peace power. So it's, people, in other words, being able to converse about, is the garbage getting collected on our street? What's the best strategy for getting your kid into this, small kindergarten or preschool? Those everyday things that require people, the give and take on an everyday basis. Reciprocity is a higher bar. Reciprocity means, well, we'll help, our neighborhood will lend a hand in your security watch if you lend a hand in our security watch, or we've got the ability to bring in some agricultural products into our market. We'll open that up to people in other parts of the village, but what can you do for us? So it's a kind of reciprocity. One, you help me, I'll help you. He also talks about, delayed payback, delayed returns. We'll help you now, and when you're back on your feet, you can help us, right? But we're not going to wait for a exchange right now. That's another level of working with people on an everyday basis. And finally, solidarity, a stronger form of not just talk and not just exchange, but actions. We'll, lend a hand with, to help you secure some safe passage for your kids to get to the school up on the top of the escarpment in the morning and not worry about them being kidnapped by an insurgent and whisked off into a child soldier's life. Okay, so those are ways in which everyday peace has a power dimension. And remember, I said radical poise is an orientation towards power. These are the forms of power that radical poise is oriented towards. So it's not radical enough. Okay. And there are tools and ways of measuring whether those things are happening. A woman by the name of Pamina Furchow wrote an interesting book back in 2018 called Reclaiming Everyday Peace, in which she put together a social science protocol for, or methodology, for surveying and collecting information on everyday peace indicators. When we get to the pictures, you're going to see how in Colombia, they use this technology or this methodology to actually identify pictures that they wanted to use in the photovoice project, because they addressed some of the everyday peace indicators that they had identified through this survey technique that she did. It's really a powerful tool. And the website, if you sort of, it's easy to Google, everydaypeaceindicators.org. There's just a ton of stuff. It's one of the best sort of peace building websites I've seen. And I confess to be a bit of a junkie when it comes to looking at peace building stuff on the web. Okay, so that's the Furchow EPIs. What is photovoice? Photovoice started at the University of Michigan, proud to say, here in Michigan, with two researchers in public health. We've had people doing photovoice here. Some of you may remember Penny Foster Fishman in the sociology department, who used a photovoice project to work with public health issues in Flint before the Flint water crisis. David Cooper, who was in the College of Arts and Letters, used photovoice project technology. And it's an attempt to empower people by giving them a chance to identify the issues in their community through images, instead of surveys in which they have to answer the question of the researcher. They generate, right, their own list of things that they think would make their community, their neighborhood, their village safer in an everyday sense. Not in the sense that, okay, what we want is this big fish to go to jail. That's not an everyday indicator of peace, whether the big fish goes to jail, right? He might be hiding out in your neighborhood, but that's not what we're interested in. We want to know what would make life safer for you on an everyday basis. And instead of giving them, a Qualtrics survey, right? They give them a camera and they say, show us, don't tell us, show us. And the women in rural China did that, and it got the attention of party, big shots. And according to Wang and Burris, the rest is history, right? Photovoice went viral in terms of some social science researchers seeing this as a more participatory action research methodology, as opposed to, a typical outsider, insider sort of conversation. Yeah.
Steve, do you have examples of the types of photographs or types of images that these women in China captured that led to such success?
Yeah, I don't, but it's out there. It's easy. Oh, you're going to get to the photos. Yeah, that's the whole reason for sitting through all this blah, blah, blah. Is there a performative contradiction? That's a philosopher jargon, right? I'm talking about, empowerment, people participating, and all I've done so far is just talk at you. My apologies.
That's why you're getting questions.
I know, you broke the spell. You broke the spell. So here are my questions for you to keep in mind. I'll fight back. Do any of the photovoice images you're about to see and the captions express or encourage greater political, emotional intelligence? And do these photo voice projects have the potential to increase everyday peace power in the forms of greater sociality, reciprocity, and solidarity? These are not just questions for you. These are the questions that we're wondering about, right? So what's the product here? What are we getting out of all this? Is it any better than a stalled truth commission or a, war crimes tribunal that just, prosecutes the big fish and a few unlucky people? So let's go to Colombia, where I think we've got some interesting pictures and amazing everyday peace indicators. Okay, so Civil War, 60 years, a lot of displacement. You've heard all about that. I'm going to take you to one particular village, San Jose, in a very poor area. And in this village, the photo voice facilitators, the outsiders, worked in collaboration with 25 community members running workshops from April through June in 2020. The photo voice participants selected their preferred indicators from among 112 most popular indicators of justice and coexistence that were given to them through the photographs of the people in the village. So you got the villagers taking pictures. The top 112 sort of went, made the first cut, and then out of that 112, they identified the ones that they were going to exhibit in the village for conversation and discussion in the village. So it's not that they took these photographs and ran and published an article about it. They took the photographs, they blew them up, as you'll see. They put them, where you couldn't miss them as you walk through the village, and they, tried to prompt with those photographs conversation in the village. But okay, so what are we going to do about this? Or what does this mean to you? Or how do you feel about this? A lot about the feelings. How do you feel about this? So now you're going to see what they saw. This is the indicator, right? So this is the everyday peace indicator that this particular photograph was given, why it was chosen, because it indicated the community with support of the church and a local community organization want to maintain this cemetery. So that's the, we might call it the title of the picture, or the everyday peace indicator that this picture refers to. And this is the caption that came out of those conversations with people who took this picture and other members of the community in San Jose. A woman in the late stage, so this was written and put on the wall with the picture, right? A woman in the late stages of a serious illness was resisting, this one is kind of tough to read, was resisting dying to avoid being taken to that neglected place, the cemetery. The deterioration of the cemetery is a testament to how much the dead are disregarded. We're talking about millions of people who died over the 60-year period, right? Not just people who died of natural causes. Weeds devour the tombs just as our minds eat away at our memories. Would it not be the right thing for us to come together to maintain it and honor the memory of the dead by keeping this place of transit to the afterlife beautiful, right? Well, I don't know about you, but it kind of rings, it brings certain thoughts to mind that I would have a hard time separating what's the emotional content from the, factual content, right? It's a combination of the feelings that are coursing through the people who are seeing this cemetery every day, knowing how the dead are disregarded. In some places you don't even have mass graves. You have a symbolic gravestone for the unknown people who've been disappeared or who been killed in a large sweep through a village. So, so this was a prompt that was then used for conversation about, and I'll get to a follow-up to this. I'm going to skip ahead to the last one, then we'll come back and fill in. Volunteer community members work to repair and maintain the local cemetery. Right? So there you have a nice example of how photovoice wasn't just a conversation starter, but it actually prompted local activities to address this. And if you've ever worked on this kind of problem in a poor community, whether it's in the north or the south, right? Cemeteries aren't always the first place that a community invests its money. And sometimes, in wealthy communities, you see these manicured lawns and you see, a lot of attention paid. In poorer communities, it's left to the family, to provide the care and take care of the plot. And what they've done here is they've collectivized the care of their memories. I'm gonna try and keep it together here. So I'm going to work backwards. Here's another everyday peace indicator. People can be in the street at any hour. So this is a little less heartbreaking. People can be in the street at any hour. And you can see this is a picture of shadows, right? So might be late in the day. Does that look like a shadow late in the day? So the sun is, so it's not quite dark, but it's getting dark near the, what do they call that? I don't know what they call it. And this is the caption for this one. This person, Francie Ferraro, an 18-year-old photographer from San Jose, a key element of coexistence in her community is the opportunity to be out of her house at any time. About this photo, she wrote, "In a world full of doubt and uncertainty, we can be calm in the knowledge that when we go out to the streets or to our land, we will not hear the terrifying sound of guns. We will be able to go out freely to work our land, to harvest our harvest without fear." For me, I'm not letting you answer my questions. Just realized I'm answering my own questions. What strikes you about this caption and this photo? You could say anything you want. There's no right answer. Will our Zoom people be able to hear? Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. So speak up. Your teacherly voices.
I'm just stricken by the creativity to depict issues of time through a shadow. And it takes some kind of a creative mind to do that. Yeah,
they didn't just take a picture of somebody walking down the street at dusk, right? They thought, okay, how do I represent this time of day using, I'm a little bit of a puppet nut, using a shadow puppet, right? Good. Other folks, other reactions to Francie's photo and caption? Not yet?
Well, I could say that people can be found in the street any hour. And just brought back to me, I'm from New York originally.
Ooh.
And yeah, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, there's people in New York walking around, but see, the context is much different than this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So it brings back memories of your own experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm from the Bronx.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay.
Yeah, all the way to the back. That's you.
Technology, the peace, safety, which indicates that they don't fear going out at specific times. So it's a kind of freedom that they feel safe.
Yeah.
As an indicator that things are going to.
Yeah, so it's safety, but safety in an everyday sense, as opposed to safety that the, perpetrators have been prosecuted, or safety that, some other top-down sort of reforms have been made, right? This is safety that they can feel in their everyday life. Good. Let me give you one more. How are we doing? I have until 1:30. Yeah, you guys, I should ask the people who gave up their lunch hour. That's more than an hour. Should I shoot for 1 o'clock and then questions? Okay, we can come back. If you're still here, you're still here. Here's another everyday peace indicator, a little more unusual. This is a quote from this particular photographer. The truth brings peace of mind, rest and reparations for the victims. Now it's the peace indicator, right? So that's why they chose this photo and this, the next quote. The truth brings peace of mind, rest and reparations for the victims. I had to live a war that wasn't mine, but the truth will set us free, or at least I believe so. I will never forget how I was a prisoner in my own land, and I will never forget who I am now, a survivor and a dignified campesino. And then the photographer writes, some photographers used their work to pay homage to older members of the community who had survived through years of the conflict and kept their communities alive. Okay. So you have, a peace indicator, truth brings peace of mind, rest and reparations. Then you have this fellow's quotation. He's a campesino. He feels dignified now, but he will never forget. He was a prisoner in his own land. Any reactions to this particular image? He's not smiling. Right. I mean, that's the first thing I see. I see his face, right? There's a kind of stoic quality to the face. I've been through a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah, but there's a sense of dignity or pride.
Yeah. So he chooses the word campesino to describe himself. And they've retained that word in the English text for us, because it means more than just a farmer, right? There's a certain relationship to the land, right, that the campesino has. Well, I think it's often translated as farmer, but sometimes it's not translated because it means in these communities more than just a farmer.
In South Africa, some of the soil.
Mm.
Somebody who's not just doing work, but somebody who is of that place.
Yeah.
Who represents it in a way. Your worldview, your whole cultural being is aligned to this sense. Yeah.
Good. Better. Thank you. That was good. I like the gestures. Did that help? Yeah.
Which one?
Spanish. Yeah. Okay. The last set, and then we'll get to the Mali pictures. Now, I can't show you these pictures, but you can imagine. These are pictures of a former child soldier, and who is, you see, one picture you see of her wounded leg. She's bleeding. The next picture you see is of her slumped over in the shadows, possibly depressed. A third picture is silhouettes of her family as they're searching for her. And the fourth picture is the family together again, where she's been welcomed back into the family. Maybe not into the community, but into the family. And this is the caption that was written to go with that sort of series of photographs of a former child soldier. She wanted to be a sister in war and a daughter of whoever. And she went by an alias, right? So she was pulled in. Being there, she lived horror. She came to know great pain. She was wounded in combat, and her heart was also wounded because, of course, she couldn't free herself from love. Now she carries real love with her, a pure and sincere love, a love for life. All there is to say is that they're there, living among us. They rebuild their families, and they are helping to transform the community. If you think of radical poise, this is the one for me that jumps out as, what kind of emotional intelligence does it take to recognize what this person chose to do, right? This was not someone who was kidnapped. This was someone who chose to join, maybe it was the FARC, maybe it was another group of rebels, and became a part of it, but she couldn't remain. She couldn't keep doing it. And she went back, and they took her back in to the family in this way. I know from working with the IDP kids in Mali, and we're going to get to the Mali photo voice stuff in a minute, this is a tough call for families and communities, right? How do we bring those people back who have had that kind of traumatic experience? And should we? I guess first, should we? And if so, how? Right? And the pictures show, you don't see the pictures because I can't get to the website. The pictures show that transformation from the physical wound to the psychological trauma to the family's fears, concerns, to something like if not a reunification, a kind of first step. They're actually walking together up a hill, and you see their backs. You don't see their faces. Their anonymity is preserved through the photograph. Through the whole thing, you don't see the face of the girl who was wounded. You don't see her in her depressed condition. You don't see the faces of the family. But this is the story that came out in conversations in the village when they put that series of photographs on the wall for people to see every day, going to the market, going to school, going to vote. Ex-guerrillas build families. So a kind of poignant photo voice final act. Now Mali. So we're not as far as they are in Colombia, right? We've had a good team. This is our team, the Cours Collaboratif Éducation à la Paix. This is a picture taken in Mali, in Bamako. I was there. I don't think I took the picture. In 2023, we have university people. We have young kids who are internally displaced. We have NGO team leaders like Garango, whose email I read to you, or whose text I read to you earlier, and the project co-directors, that's Welore Tamboura and myself. And we did publish an article, I'm going to plug an article, as Awa mentioned, that's come out, and that was a nice sort of way for Welore to feel like, this is something that she's proud of, and she has her name attached to it too. And this describes sort of the way in which the peace education program worked. Remember what Garango said. you can't do peace education in Mali today. You can't use the words, or the junta will put you out of business if you're an NGO, or worse, if they think you're, a political troublemaker. But in 2022, 2023, we were still able to, fly our flag. This is, so now the pictures of Mali. This is the training, the trust building. The fellow in the background is from the Malian photo studio, Yamaru, who's the head of the studio, teaching young kids in the Mabile internally displaced persons camp in Bamako how to crop their pictures, how to understand what a good picture is, and how to use a point and shoot camera, things they had no experience doing. And after we took the first set of pictures, they discussed them. There were probably about 20 young kids in that little workshop group that Yamaru ran. This is one of the pictures that kind of rose to the top, right? So just like the Columbia Photo Voice project, we said, go out and take pictures of what moves you, right? What's important, where there's everyday peace or the absence of everyday peace in the camps. And this came back among, let's say, 500 photos. So we had a full stack of photos. And this was taken by one of the university mentors. So we paired up one mentor with two IDP kids, and the mentors took pictures and the mentees took pictures. This was a picture taken by Tenimba Sissoko, which she titled Sharing. And the everyday peace indicator for us was young residents helping newcomers move in to the camp. This is an unusual camp. The building you see in the background is a former high school, former lycée. And in each of the classrooms, which is maybe a third the size of this room, there would be 7 or 8 families living in that classroom. And you can see they're hanging stuff out to dry. It's where they sleep, where they eat, where they, have some privacy. And then in the courtyard, there were more tents, right? So the camp was overflowing people. The building is about 6 stories high. You know, some of the lycées in West Africa, they're kind of very large block buildings. They may have been built during the Soviet era. These are kids who volunteered to help a family that's just been sort of referred to Mabile, which was a preferred placement if you were, trying to get into a camp. So that's, I'm going to go through all of them, and then you can decide which ones you want to zero in on. This is not a preferred placement, Fajole. And it's a picture taken again by another university student, Maimuna Doumbia. And the indicator that she came up with was mother and daughter sharing childcare and cooking responsibilities in front of their tent. So it's another form of sharing, but there's more going on here, right, than that. You can see the daughter is carrying a baby on her back. Maybe you can't see that, but if you zoom in with your eyeballs, you can see the daughter there's a third member of the family there. And this is how they have 1 meal a day, and it's a kind of porridge that they cook in the morning, and it's there as long as people can get to it. So that's a second photo that kind of rose to the top when our teams got together. This is taken in a third IDP camp, Yamana, and taken by one of the IDP kids. I say kids. The IDP kids were from the ages of 14 to 25, right? and many of them weren't sure exactly what their birth date was, or so we didn't press them on how old are you. That was our assessment. And the everyday peace indicator that we came up with was elders who came from the same village sharing a friendly moment together. I think one of these guys is holding a cell phone. There was no reception in these camps, but he had a cell phone. So it may have been a way of telling time or just something he hung on to. Reminds me of I don't want to digress. Maybe if there's time, I'll come back to cell phone technology in the IDP camps, which was weird. So these two guys who are hugging might be old friends, they might not be, but they're all from the same village. Initially, when the mentee brought the picture back to the team and said, "What do you think?" we said, "Are these two from a different village than the third one?" Because there's some competition in the camp about which elders are going to rule the roost, right? And will any of the elders have any authority in the camp, because they've kind of lost their sort of status as an elder in the village. It turned out they were all three from the same village. This is taken by another mentee, a young woman in the Mobile camp. That's the camp. So this is taken in the courtyard outside of the old lycée that you saw in the first picture. And this woman is Fulani. You can tell by her sort of dress and her makeup and bearing, maintaining her cultural identity while doing daily cooking and cleaning. That was the peace indicator that the team came up with to identify this, this photograph. Are you familiar with the conflict in Mali between Fulani and Dogon? This is kind of a conflict that's kind of reached kind of high intensity. And so sort of identifying yourself as Fulani in a camp where there may be people who are not Fulani is not always the safest thing. We took this picture in early 22. When I was back in the camp later in 23, I went to see some of the people whose pictures we took. And this woman had been in a terrible car accident and was just not in the same good condition that she had been before. But when we showed her the picture and asked her what'd she think of the picture, she said, "That's how I used to look." It was kind of sad. So this is a picture taken by another of the kids in the camp, and this is a politically complicated picture. Those are not handkerchiefs. Those are small facsimiles of the Malian flag. And the team identified the everyday peace indicator in a complicated way. Displaying the national flag on Independence Day in memory of those who fought against the colonial forces and in support of the recent expulsion of the French military in Mali, right? So it had a double meaning in terms of national identity and pride. It was a way of remembering who had fought against the French initially to secure independence, and it was a kind of reaffirmation of the support that this particular household that was sort of hanging the flags that they could get, in terms of their support of the ejection or expulsion of the French military forces. And that's separate from the UN forces, the MINUSMA troops. There were UN forces and French forces, and some other, there was a smaller Swedish maybe, or Norwegian set of forces there. But the expulsion of the French was a big deal. So this is not a sharing moment or a sort of ethnic pride moment. It's a kind of national identity, right? A kind of assertion of solidarity. I'll answer my own question here. Assertion of solidarity, not just sociality or reciprocity.
Their desire for freedom.
Yes, solidarity for freedom, right? We demand our freedom, finally. Yeah. Here's the flip side of everyday peace. This is everyday sort of struggle against unsanitary conditions, dilapidated housing, an unsafe space. And this was taken by a mentee, Ada Coulibaly, who titled it, "Where is the Hygiene in These Camps?" Right. So this is let's say a 16, 17-year-old woman, Ada, in Falaje, which is the poorest and the least well equipped of the 3 camps we worked in. These 3 camps actually are the best of the 15 or 20 camps in Mali. So when Garango says he's going to be working in camps in Gao and the Mopti region and Kidal, he's going to be working in camps that have much less than what these 3 camps have. Certainly no buildings like the Mabile camp, and maybe no regular food supplies. And last one, this is from the Nyamana camp, a poor camp. And the peace indicator is young girls working together to gather discarded charcoal for cooking in their own family tent. So the source of fuel in the camps is charcoal. And they have to purchase it. It's not free. So they have to find a way to conserve whatever money they have through trading and bartering in the camps for other things. And sometimes people don't burn all the charcoal the day before, and there's some left on the ground. So one of the jobs, self-appointed jobs of these young girls is to go around, without creating a stink, without annoying anybody, and picking up small leftover pieces of charcoal, which they carry in these buckets on their head back to their individual families. So it's a kind of sharing, again, a kind of toleration they do it openly, right? Toleration by the families in the camp that we can, accept that somebody might come by and pick up some of the used charcoal from last night and hope they can use it again. So you can see, that's my last slide. How about that? Oh, do I get a blue star, red star, right on time? Yeah. So going back, I go back to that thing about radical poise. It's a long way back. You guys sat through a lot. So remember what I was saying was, one of the obstacles to success in peace building in many countries is that the sort of issues and the programs that come out of top-down peace building through war crimes tribunals and truth commissions and other kinds of policies are so emotionally charged that, when it comes to implementation, things fall apart, right? To use an old phrase. Things fall apart. The same with local attempts, like those four guys, like the kidnapped teacher and the fed up farmer who thought, well, we can make peace with these terrorists, but things fall apart. And so one reason things fall apart is that we don't have the emotional intelligence, or what I'm calling the radical poise, to see how to manage power, when it's local, when it's in our everyday lives. And so these photographs and the process of taking the photograph and illustrating the photograph and captioning the photograph is a way of teaching young people that kind of emotional intelligence, right? It's a way of teaching emotional intelligence by going through the process of everyday peace building and photo voice. So my question is, I think Colombia does a good job. My question is, what can we do? What can we do in Mali, where the country is so much poorer? The thing about Colombia, despite 60 years of civil war, it's a rich country in terms of resources, right? And in terms of the educational system. The educational system works, maybe not perfectly, but compared to Mali, where so many schools have been closed and so many kids are out of school, you might say Colombia at least works better than Mali does. Can this kind of peace education that focuses not just on, cognitive skills, but on sort of self-restraint, resistance, humility, struggle, can this play a role when the junta is saying you can't do peace education now? I guess my question is, if they won't let us do it there, where do we do it? And the answer to that is, well, we're going to go to Benin and take people from Mali to Benin to do it. So we've already actually done that once. And our hope is we can keep sort of doing it on that offshore platform, so to speak, until things are restructured in Mali. But I'll stop there with a few final moments for any questions. If there are online questions, do you guys, Mike, that's what you've been doing?
Yeah, so we have one question here, but before that, thank you for the very interesting presentation, lots of insight. So we have, Jennifer has a question. Are some of foot soldiers of the militia, including those of Wagner, made up local men who are known by villagers? What is that relationship like, and how does that affect the violence?
Yes, some of the soldiers in the Malian army are, Malian, and the young boys in villages have two choices. If the school is closed, which it often is, they can, see if there are armed non-government forces that they can go to work for. And they're told, well, you'll get a small payment and you can give that back to your family. So some families encourage kids to join that group, or they can enlist in the army. And they may not be old enough to formally enlist, but they can, join the army as a gun boy and just sort of work in support of a soldier there and hopefully ultimately join the army. Not an unusual practice in many African countries over the last 100 years, right? But there are Malians in the Malian army besides the Wagner group. Was that the question? Yeah.
Anybody have questions?
Yeah.
Just two things for sharing this. Do we know the causes of these conflicts in both places, Mali and Colombia?
There's a lot written about it. I would say that part of the cause in Colombia has changed over time. I'm not a specialist on Colombian sort of politics, but what complicates the Colombian case is the drug cartel, right? So some of the violence comes from sort of competition between the army and the drug cartel, and who's going to control certain territories in the country. And that's still going on. So San Jose, where the photovoice project was located that you saw, the cartel is very active there. So the violence and the disappearances that are happening there are in part due to the continued dominance of the cartel. There was an election in Colombia, maybe a year and a half ago. And there's been some hope that the report of the Truth Commission will be now implemented more effectively than it was before. But that report, which is like 800 pages long, gives an answer to your question, which I probably don't want to try to summarize quickly. In Mali, the causes have, also been complicated because of the instability in the region and the overthrow of Gaddafi, which triggered some people would argue triggered the coup in Mali in 2012. The role of insurgent groups in Mali, also looking for access to minerals and resources, and drug trafficking and human trafficking. So you might say there are economic causes for some of the conflict. There's also deep structural poverty in Mali that is pervasive in a way that in Colombia you have some cities that are not as impoverished, though there are parts of the big cities that are very poor, not as divided as they are in, say, a country like Angola, but there are divisions within even the better off cities and urban areas, which has led to political conflict. So economic conflicts, fights over drugs, control over natural resources. Those are the big vectors. Not identical, but there's some interesting parallels. Yeah.
We're just curious about what happened after the children took the pictures, like were there sessions where you,
In Mali,
in Mali, discussions about what
we had 2 workshops with the university students and the IDP participants, the young people, in which they talked about why they took their pictures and what the pictures meant to them and how the pictures made them feel and what it was like to work with the people in the camps. We had 2 good workshops, and then we couldn't go back.
So there was no sharing with all the camp members.
Our next step is to have an exhibit. Yeah, so we have the exhibit venues set up in the camps, also at the university and at the National Museum. But as Garango said, you can't do peace education in Mali right now. So we couldn't put those pictures up right now. Yeah.
You mentioned about the French military. What were they doing in Mali?
The French?
Yes.
Well, they were the dominant colonial power in, starting in the late 19th century and up till 1961 when they were tossed out. So the French, were there as they were there for cotton and slaves.
Are they part of the problem? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I think in almost every case where you have these current conflicts, it's in the context of a colonial history, right? So the French favored some people and promoted some people, created divisions within the Malian social order, kind of divide and conquer strategy, which is not uncommon for colonial powers. So I thought you were asking about who was fighting each other right now. But the deeper conflicts involve that colonial history. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's very important for people to know, people like who don't study history and
Yeah.
People don't know the connection between the colonial legacies continue to stay through military process in Africa, things like that. So
No, I didn't mean to suggest before that I thought that the expulsion of the French was a bad idea. I think, as Awa said, it was an attempt to assert a kind of independence that hadn't been yet achieved after the formal independence in 1961. Right, there was still a French presence in Mali. It was social, it was economic. The Malian economy was primarily running on French aid, and that aid was not distributed equally, and the governance, Malian governance, never really matured as a democracy. It remained under the tutelage of the French. And they did a lot to sort of orchestrate Malian politics even after they were no longer governing the country. Yeah. Good point. Thank
I
you.
think we are almost out of time, so thank you very much for this presentation.